The millionaire mocked a waitress and put her at the piano. Moments later, the room fell silent. The tray was heavy. It was always heavy by the third hour. Elena Vasquez had learned to hold it with her elbow slightly bent, her wrist locked, her shoulder doing the quiet work that nobody ever noticed. She had learned a lot of things nobody noticed. That was the job. That was in many ways the entire point of the job, to be present without being seen, to move through a room full of people without registering as a person herself. The Grand Alderton Hotel ballroom was the kind of room that made ordinary people feel small on purpose. The ceilings were 30 feet high. The chandeliers were not decorations, they were announcements. Every surface that could be gold was gold, and every surface that could not be gold was ivory, and together they said one thing very clearly to anyone who walked through the door: you are either someone here or you are no one. Elena was no one. She knew it the moment she had pinned her name tag to her uniform that evening. The uniform itself was the message: stiff white shirt, black trousers, black shoes with rubber soles so she could move without sound. She was 27 years old, and she had been wearing versions of this uniform for 3 years, and she had made peace with it the way you make peace with a thing you plan to leave soon. Tonight was a charity gala, one of the big ones. The kind where wealthy people paid $10,000 a table to be seen paying $10,000 a table, and somewhere between the appetizers and the dessert course, a representative from some foundation would take the microphone, and everyone would applaud and feel good about themselves and go home. Elena did not have opinions about this. She had a tray. She moved between tables with the fluid efficiency of someone who had stopped thinking about the movement and simply did it. Refill the water, clear the bread plates, check the wine levels, smile when smiled at, disappear when not. The room was full, 300 guests, maybe more. Politicians, executives, real estate developers, celebrities of the minor local variety. They wore suits that cost more than Elena's monthly rent and dresses that would be photographed and uploaded and forgotten by morning. They laughed at things that were not funny because laughing was a form of currency here, and everyone was spending it freely. She was moving toward table 9 with a fresh pitcher of water when she first noticed Richard Ashton. Not because he was loud, he was not loud. Loud men were easy, you could hear them coming, you could brace yourself. Ashton was the other kind. He sat at the center of his table the way a stone sits at the center of a pond, still, heavy, everything else arranged around him. He was in his late 50s, thick through the shoulders, with silver hair that had been cut by someone who charged for the haircut the way restaurants charge for the view. He wore a dark suit and no tie, which in a room full of ties meant something. His table was laughing. They were always laughing at his table. Elena had noticed it twice already in the past hour, not because he told jokes, because he made observations, quiet and flat, and the people around him laughed to show they had understood. She approached with the pitcher, reached past a woman in a red dress to refill the glass nearest the edge, efficient, invisible. "Look at that," Ashton said. He was not speaking to Elena. He was speaking to the man beside him, but his voice was the kind of voice that did not bother lowering itself for anybody. "They put girls from the kitchen out front now, you can always tell." He picked up his wine glass, the hands. Elena's hands were on the pitcher. She did not stop pouring. The water level rose in the glass, steady, controlled, not a tremor. "And the shoes," he added. "You can buy the uniform, you cannot buy the shoes." The table laughed. The woman in the red dress laughed too, a half second behind the others, like she was checking which direction the wind was blowing before she committed. Elena set the pitcher down. She looked at Ashton, not with heat, not with cold, just looked at him the way you look at a weather report, and she smiled. The smile was professional. It was the smile of a woman who had decided, a long time ago, that certain rooms did not deserve her real face. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. Ashton did not answer. He had already looked away. She picked up the pitcher, moved to the next table. Her shoulder did the quiet work. Nobody noticed. But across the ballroom, tucked against the far wall between two enormous floral arrangements, there was a grand piano. A Steinway black, polished to a mirror finish. It sat on a low platform, a stage barely 8 inches off the ground, but a stage nonetheless. It had been there all evening, waiting with the patience of something that knew its moment was coming. Elena had looked at it when she arrived for her shift, just once. Then she had looked away and picked up her tray. She had gotten good at that, looking at something once and then looking away. The gala was supposed to have a pianist. His name was on the printed program, a local musician, well regarded, known for playing at these kinds of events. The program listed him for 9 o'clock. It was now 8:53, and the event coordinator, a thin man named Paul Garrett, was standing near the kitchen doors with his phone pressed to his ear and a look on his face that a person gets when they already know the answer to the question they are asking. The pianist had canceled. Food poisoning, his manager said, possibly food poisoning. The wording had been vague enough that Paul had spent the last 10 minutes trying to decide whether to be sympathetic or furious, and had settled grimly on both. He hung up and stared at the Steinway. 300 guests, 40 minutes until the program ended and people started leaving, a piano that nobody was going to play. Alina was passing by with an empty tray when Paul turned around. He did not mean to say it to her. He meant to say it to himself, or to the kitchen doors, or to the general atmosphere of his bad evening. The pianist canceled, he said. We have nobody. Alina stopped. She looked at Paul, then she looked at the piano. Then she looked back at Paul, and something moved across her face, something small and quick that she put away almost immediately, like a card she had not meant to show. I can play, she said. Paul stared at her. You play piano? Yes. He looked at the ballroom, 300 guests, a Steinway, a waitress in rubber-soled shoes holding an empty tray. How well, he asked. Alina did not answer the way he expected. She did not give him a list of qualifications or a history or a defense. She just said, well enough for tonight. Paul did a calculation that only a desperate man can do quickly. He looked at the piano, he looked at her, he looked at his watch. Okay, he said, yes, okay. She set her tray down on a nearby service cart. She smoothed the front of her uniform jacket. She crossed the ballroom floor, and the distance between the service cart and the piano bench was not a long distance, maybe 40 feet, but it passed through something, that 40 feet. It passed through 3 years of trays and water pitchers and rubber-soled shoes and the particular kind of silence that a room full of people imposes on the people who serve them. Ashton's table was near the piano. He saw her walking toward it. He said something to the man beside him. Low, amused, the man smiled. Alina did not look at them. She reached the bench, she sat down. She adjusted it 2 inches back, a small shift of the height lever, with the automatic, unthinking precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times in rooms much larger and much more important than this one, and in rooms much smaller and much more quiet, and in rooms that existed only in memory now. She placed her hands on the keys. The room was still talking, glasses still clinking, 300 people doing what 300 people do when they have had good wine and are waiting for the next thing. She began to play. The first notes were soft, not timid, soft the way a person speaks softly when they are completely certain of what they are saying. The melody came out clean and clear and immediately, irreversibly itself. And the room kept talking. For about 4 seconds. Then the woman at the table nearest the piano stopped mid-sentence. Her companion looked at her. She was not looking back. She was looking at the piano, at Alina's hands, moving across the keys with a calm that was almost alarming, the calm of something that has waited a long time to be exactly where it is. The silence spread, table by table, one conversation ending, then another, the chatter of 300 people dissolving the way fog dissolves, not all at once but steadily from the edges in. Paul Garrett stood by the kitchen doors with his arms folded, and his heart doing something he did not have a name for yet. Ashton's hands, resting on the tablecloth, went still. Alina played. She did not look at the room. Her eyes were fixed at a point just above the piano's music rest, not at the wall, not at anyone's face, not at anything that existed in this room on this evening. She was looking at something else entirely, something nobody else could see, and she was playing toward it. The chandeliers, 30 feet above, threw their light down as they always did. Nobody was looking at the chandeliers. The piece she played was not showy. It did not announce itself or demand attention or perform its own difficulty. It simply moved, one phrase opening into the next, each one breathing before it resolved, each resolution opening a door to somewhere new. It was the kind of music that did not ask you to admire it. It asked you to feel something, and it did not particularly care whether you wanted to or not. The woman near the back, the one in the green dress who had come tonight with her husband and had spent most of the evening nodding at conversations she was not really part of, she felt her throat tighten. She reached for her wine glass and then did not drink from it. She set it back down and pressed her fingertips to the table and breathed. She could not have told you what the music reminded her of. She was not a musical person. She had not played an instrument since the 3rd grade, and she had not been good at it even then. But something in Alina's playing reached past all of that and touched something older, something that did not require education or vocabulary or the right kind of background. It just found you. It put its hand on your shoulder without asking permission. That is what real music does. 3 tables away, a man who had built 3 companies from nothing and sold them all at the right moment, and had not felt genuinely surprised by anything in 11 years, found himself leaning forward with his elbows on the table, listening. Actually listening. Not performing the act of listening the way you do at these events, nodding and maintaining eye contact and thinking about the next thing, but listening with his whole body, his expensive suit and his strategic mind temporarily set aside. He did not know the piece. He could not have named it. He would try to look it up later and fail because Alina was not playing it exactly as written. She was playing it the way you play something that belongs to you, with small variations, small choices, small size built into the phrasing that no sheet music can notate. Paul Garrett realized he had stopped breathing at a normal rate. He corrected this. He watched Alina's back, straight, steady, the white uniform jacket moving slightly with the motion of her arms, and he felt the specific, disorienting feeling of having made a decision that turned out to be far larger than the decision he thought he was making. He had said yes to a waitress covering for a canceled pianist. He had not said yes to this. But here it was. Ashton had not moved. His wine glass was full and getting warmer, and he had not touched it. The man beside him had stopped whatever he was saying mid-word and was looking at the piano with an expression that he would have been embarrassed to admit to in daylight. The woman in the red dress, the one who had laughed at Ashton's comment about the shoes, was looking at her own hands in her lap. Alina moved from the first piece into the second without stopping. No pause, no announcement, no bow to the audience. Just the last note of one thing and the first breath of another. The transition was seamless enough that several people did not even register it as a shift. They simply felt the room change mood the way a room changes when someone opens a window. The second piece was different. Where the first had been interior, meditative, a thing that moved inward, this one opened. It was expansive and warm, and it had a pulse to it that made you aware of your own heartbeat, aware that you were a body in a room and that other bodies in the room were feeling something adjacent to what you were feeling, and that this shared feeling, whatever it was rare. A man near the center quietly reached under the table and took his wife's hand. She looked at him. He was looking at the piano. She looked at the piano too. They had been married for 23 years and had spent the last 4 of them in the kind of distance that accumulates so slowly you stop noticing it until it is very large. They had come tonight because it was the kind of event you come to when you are trying to look like things are fine. They had not spoken a real sentence to each other since the car. She did not let go of his hand. He did not look away from the piano. That was all, but it was not nothing. Alina played on. Her face was calm, not the professional calm of the uniform and the smile in the water pitcher, a different kind of calm. The kind that comes from being entirely inside something, from being so completely in the right place that the rest of the world simplifies itself into background. She had not played for an audience in 3 years. She had played every day. In her apartment on a second-hand keyboard with weighted keys and headphones because the walls were thin and the neighbors had a baby. Every day without fail, the way you practice a thing not because an audience is coming, but because the thing itself requires it. Because you are a person who plays piano the way some people are people who breathe a certain way, and if you stop, something essential goes wrong. She had not planned on tonight being anything other than a shift. But here she was. And here was the room. The third piece she had not planned to play 3, had not planned anything beyond the first 30 seconds, arrived naturally, the way the next thing always arrives when you are in the current of something real. It was quieter than the others, slower. It had the feeling of very late at night, of a conversation that has gone past all the polite surface topics and arrived somewhere honest. The room held it. Nobody coughed, nobody's chair scraped. The kitchen doors, which had been swinging open and closed all evening as servers moved in and out, had gone still. Someone in the kitchen had put their head out at some point and quietly told the others to stop moving for a minute. They had been standing there for 12 minutes. Ashton's jaw was tight, not with anger, with something he did not have a ready name for and did not particularly want to examine in public. He was a man who had built his identity on judgment, on knowing the value of things before other people did, on seeing correctly quickly ahead of the curve. That was the story he told about himself, and it was largely a true story. He had looked at a woman carrying a water pitcher and seen a woman carrying a water pitcher. He was sitting in a room of 300 people, every one of them motionless, listening to that woman play the piano with the kind of mastery that takes a lifetime to build. He picked up his wine glass, set it back down without drinking. His hand was not entirely steady. The last note arrived. Alina held it, let it ring, let it thin out into the air of the ballroom and dissolve, and then she lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap and looked at the piano's black surface for one moment, quiet and private, before she looked up. The room was still. Not the held-breath silence of people waiting to react, the genuine silence of people who have been taken somewhere and have not entirely come back yet. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone did. It was not polite applause. It was not the rhythmic social clapping of people who have been told that now is the time to clap. It came from somewhere involuntary, somewhere that does not consult good manners before it acts. People were on their feet before they had decided to stand. The sound rose and filled that enormous room all the way up to the chandeliers, and the chandeliers, for the first time all evening, had competition. Alina stood. She did not bow dramatically. She dipped her head once, a small and genuine acknowledgement, and then she looked at the room, really looked at it, for the first time since she had sat down. 300 faces, open, lit, many of them wet-eyed, all of them pointed at her. She let herself see them. Then she stepped away from the bench, smoothed the front of her uniform jacket, and walked back across the 40 feet of ballroom floor. Paul Garrett was moving toward her, his hands reaching out, his face doing something complicated and grateful and slightly stunned. Other people were reaching for her too, guests turning from their tables, guests who had been looking through her all evening and were now looking at her, really at her, the way you look at someone when you have just understood something important about them. She shook Paul's hand. She accepted the thanks of the people nearest her with a quiet grace that did not perform itself. She answered 2 questions from a woman who gripped her arm and asked, her voice still unsteady, who she studied with, what she had played, where she performed. "I'm between things right now," Alina said. She said it evenly, without apology. She could see Ashton getting up from his table. He was a large man, and the crowd parted for him the way crowds part for large, certain men. He moved toward her with his chin slightly up, and his face composed into something that probably, in his world, passed for humility. He reached her, extended his hand. "That was remarkable," he said. "Genuinely, I want to apologize for earlier. It was beneath me." Alina looked at him. She shook his hand. Her grip was firm and brief, and she released it and said, "Thank you for listening." Not "thank you for apologizing, thank you for listening." Then she turned, picked up her tray from the service cart where she had left it, checked the water levels at the tables nearest her. Ashton stood where she had left him. The room was still buzzing, still warm, still full of the afterglow of something that had happened here that had not been on the program. People were talking about it already, leaning toward each other, that particular electric energy of a shared experience that everyone knows they will be telling someone about tomorrow. Alina moved between the tables. Efficient, present, her shoulder doing the quiet work. But something was different now. The room was different. The people at the tables looked up when she came near, not through her at her. Some smiled, some said thank you, which they had not done before. The woman in the red dress, when Alina reached her table with the water pitcher, said, "You were extraordinary," in a voice that was trying to make up for something. "Thank you," Alina said, and refilled her glass. She finished her shift. All of it, the clearing of the dessert plates, the final round of water, the folding and stacking and reset that the end of every gala requires. She did not leave early. She did not accept the invitation from Paul, who came to find her near the end of the night and told her he had 3 contacts he wanted to pass along, people who booked musicians for events, people who would want to know her name. She took the business cards, folded them into her jacket pocket. She collected her tips, changed her shoes in the staff room, the black rubber-soled ones for the worn leather flats she had arrived in, took the service elevator down. The lobby of the Grand Alderton was quiet at this hour. The last guests were filtering out. A doorman held the door. Taxis idled at the curb. Alina walked through the lobby and through the door and out into the night air, which was cool and smelled like rain that had already come and gone. She stopped on the sidewalk, took one long breath. Then she reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out the business cards Paul had given her, and looked at them in the light of the street lamp. 3 names, 3 numbers, 3 doors she had not had yesterday. She put them back in her pocket, started walking. The morning after the gala, the city did what it always did, it moved. Traffic, coffee cups, people in a hurry to be somewhere that required them to be in a hurry. The Grand Alderton Hotel sent its serving staff home with their tip envelopes and recycled the floral arrangements and turned the ballroom back into a ballroom, neutral and waiting, ready for the next event that would fill it and empty it and leave it ready again. Alina woke up in her apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street that had good bones and terrible heating. The second-hand keyboard was against the wall beneath the window, headphones hanging from the corner of it. She had lived in this apartment for 2 years and she had arranged the furniture 3 times, but the keyboard had never moved. It was always against the wall beneath the window, where the morning light came through at a low angle and made the keys look almost warm. She made coffee. She sat at the small table by the window and drank it slowly. She thought about the Steinway. Not with longing exactly, more the way you think about a conversation that went well, with the satisfaction of something completed, something said that needed saying. The Steinway had done its job, she had done hers. She picked up her phone. The cards Paul had given her were on the table beside it. She looked at them while she drank her coffee. One name she recognized, a woman named Carol Dunning, who ran a concert series in the city's smaller venues, not the prestige halls but the real ones, the 300-seat rooms where people came because they genuinely wanted to hear music and not because being seen at a concert was the right thing to do that season. Alina had gone to 2 concerts in that series years ago before everything changed. She had sat in the back and listened and thought, someday. Someday had a business card now. She called Carol Dunning's number at 9 in the morning. She had rehearsed nothing, she simply called. Carol Dunning answered on the 3rd ring with the voice of someone who had been awake for 2 hours and had already made decisions. Alina Vasquez, she said, before Alina had fully introduced herself. Paul Garrett called me last night at 11:15. He was still at the hotel. Alina said nothing, waited. He said, and I am quoting him directly, Carol continued, that he watched 300 people stop everything they were doing and stand up. A pause. Paul has been running events for 19 years. I have never heard him say that about anything. The room was generous, Alina said. Don't do that, Carol said, not unkindly. Don't explain it away. I've been in this business long enough to know what 300 people standing up means, and it doesn't mean the room was generous. It means the playing was extraordinary. Alina was quiet for a moment. What I have, Carol said, is a Saturday slot 6 weeks out, a cancellation. It's 200 seats and it's on short notice, and I usually wouldn't fill it this way, but I'm going to offer it to you because Paul Garrett called me at 11:15 at night, which he has never done in 19 years. Alina looked at the keyboard against the wall. Yes, she said. Just yes. Yes, I'll take it. Carol made a sound that might have been a laugh. Good, my assistant will send you the details. And Alina, bring something real. The people who come to my series, they'll know if you don't. I know, Alina said. She hung up, sat with the phone in her hand. 6 weeks, She had 6 weeks and a room that held 200 people and no program prepared, no set list, no recent experience performing in front of anyone who had come specifically to hear her. She had a keyboard with weighted keys and thin walls and a neighbor with a baby. She picked up her phone again, called a number she had not called in 2 years. Her former teacher, a woman named Ruth Hale, who had taught at the conservatory for 31 years and had retired to a house in the avenues with a real piano, a baby grand, slightly out of tune, but real. Ruth Hale, who had watched Alina leave the conservatory 3 years ago with a performance degree and no safety net, and had said quietly that the door was always open. Alina had not walked through the door. Until now. Ruth answered. I was wondering, Ruth said, when you were going to call. There was no reproach in it, just the flat, accurate observation of someone who had been a teacher long enough to know that students come back when they are ready and not a moment before. I have a concert, Alina said, 6 weeks. Come Thursday, Ruth said, 10 in the morning. I'll have the piano tuned. Alina thanked her, hung up. She looked around the apartment, the keyboard, the small table, the window letting in its low morning light. 3 years in this apartment. 3 years of shifts and trays and uniforms and the particular arithmetic of covering rent month to month while keeping the other thing alive, the real thing, the thing that did not fit on a name tag or a uniform. She had not stopped, that was the important thing, the thing she held on to when the weight of the tray was heavy and the room was looking through her. She had not stopped. Every day the keyboard, every day the headphones, the thin walls, the neighbor's baby, every day because you do not stop playing just because the room is not listening. You play so that when the room finally goes quiet, you are ready. She had been ready last night. She would be ready in 6 weeks. She finished her coffee, washed the cup, put it back on the shelf. Then she sat down at the keyboard, slipped the headphones on, and began. The weeks that followed moved the way preparation always moves, with a kind of driven interior urgency that looks from the outside like ordinary life. Alina kept her shifts at the Grand Alderton. She needed the income, and she was not someone who quit things before she had something solid to land on. She carried the trays. She refilled the water. She moved through the rooms in her rubber-soled shoes, efficient and present, and nobody who had not been at the gala would have seen anything different about her. But on Thursday mornings, she took the bus to Ruth Hale's house in the Avenues, and she sat at the slightly out-of-tune baby grand that had been tuned now properly at Ruth's insistence, and she worked. Ruth Hale was 71 years old and small and precise in the way of someone who had spent a lifetime caring about exactness. She did not give compliments easily. She did not speak while Alina played, did not nod or smile or react. She sat in the chair beside the piano with her hands folded and her eyes closed, and she listened with the whole of her attention, and when Alina finished, she opened her eyes and said what she heard. Not what was good, what was happening. You're rushing the third phrase, she said the first Thursday, not from nerves, from eagerness. You want to get to the part you love, and you're skipping past the thing that earns it. Alina played it again. Better, Ruth said, now the left hand is compensating. You're correcting one thing by leaning on another. She played it again. There, Ruth said, that's what it sounds like when you trust it. This was how they worked, slowly, carefully, phrase by phrase. Not because Alina was not skilled, Ruth had not seen many students with Alina's natural depth of understanding, but because a concert is not about being skilled. A concert is about being present in every single measure, and presence is a discipline, not a talent. The piece Alina had decided to anchor the concert on was one she had been building for years, not composed exactly, but assembled, the way something grows when you spend enough time with it. It had begun as an exercise in her second year at the conservatory and had never stopped developing. She knew it the way she knew her own breathing, automatically, from the inside, and that intimacy was precisely what she needed to bring it fully to life for an audience. Ruth heard it on the third Thursday. She sat in her chair with her eyes closed for the full 11 minutes. When Alina finished, she did not speak immediately. She looked at the window, then she looked at Alina. Where has this been? She said. In the apartment, Alina said, on the keyboard. Ruth shook her head slowly. That piece needed a room. I know. It still needs something, Ruth said. In the middle, you disappear. For about 30 seconds, you disappear into the technique and the music loses you. The audience will feel it as a drop in temperature and they won't know why. Alina nodded. She knew the passage Ruth meant. She had always known. It was the section that asked the most of her technically, and she had been winning that fight, playing it cleanly, accurately, and losing the more important one. She played it again from the middle, slower, not fixing the technique, finding herself inside it. There, Ruth said quietly. Don't let go of that. 2 weeks before the concert, Carol Dunning sent the program notes request, the photographer, and a short questionnaire that asked for a bio. Alina stared at the bio question for a long time. The honest version was complicated. Conservatory degree, 3 years of cascading financial difficulty after graduation, the competitive field, the student loans, the gigs that did not materialize as expected, the gradual slide from part-time hospitality work to full-time hospitality work while the performing dried up and the keyboard in the apartment was the only place left that asked nothing from her except that she show up. And she had shown up, every day, that mattered. She wrote the bio in 4 sentences. She mentioned the conservatory. She mentioned that she had been developing her own repertoire outside of formal performing for several years. She mentioned that she was glad to be returning to the stage. She did not mention the gala. She did not mention the tray or the uniform or the room that had gone quiet. Carol Dunning knew the story. The audience would arrive without it, and that was better. The music should speak first. The night before the concert, Alina did not play. Ruth had told her not to. Your hands know the music, she said. Spend the evening with something else, cook something, watch something. Let the work rest. Alina cooked pasta and ate it at the small table by the window, and watched the light go out of the sky over Clement Street and thought about nothing in particular, which took more effort than most people realize. She thought about her mother, who had driven her to piano lessons every Saturday for 11 years in a car that needed a new muffler, and never got one because the lessons cost money and something had to give. Her mother, who had worked 2 jobs and asked only one thing of Alina in return, that she use the gift, really use it, not out of obligation, but because a gift that goes unused is a kind of ingratitude toward whatever gave it to you. She thought about the Steinway at the Grand Alderton, about the 40 feet of ballroom floor, about the specific feeling of sitting down at an unfamiliar instrument in a room full of strangers and recognizing, in that first moment of contact, that the instrument was going to cooperate, that it was a good piano, well-maintained, and that the room's acoustics were generous, and that the night might be something. It had been something. She washed her plate, went to bed early. Slept well. The concert hall was on Grove Street, in a building that had been a warehouse in a previous life and still had the bones of it, high wooden ceilings, exposed beams, wide windows that the management had covered with heavy drapes for acoustic reasons. 200 seats arranged in a gentle arc around a low stage. On the stage, a Yamaha concert grand, recently serviced, polished, waiting. Alina arrived 90 minutes before the doors opened. She sat at the piano alone for 30 minutes, not practicing, touching, running her hands across the keys without pressing them, learning the weight of this particular instrument, the slight variations in key resistance that every piano has, the way the sustained pedal responded, the way the room's dimensions would shape the sound and send it back to her. Every piano is different, every room is different. A performer who has not made peace with that fact will spend the entire concert fighting the instrument instead of playing it. She had learned this from Ruth. She had also learned it the harder way. At 7:45, Carol Dunning came backstage. Carol was a small woman with short gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead that she was always forgetting were there. She had been running this series for 12 years and had heard enough music to tell the difference between a performer who was ready and a performer who thought they were ready, and she looked at Alina for a moment with the clear, assessing eyes of someone who has that particular experience. "Full house," she said, "every seat." Alina nodded. "I want you to know," Carol said, "that I have had 3 people ask me this week whether it's true, whether you were really a waitress at the Alderton Gala. Someone posted about it on social media. The story is out there." Alina was quiet. "Does that bother you?" Carol asked. "A little," Alina said, honest. "The story is going to bring people tonight who want to see the miracle," Carol said, "but music doesn't care why people come. It works on them the same way regardless." "I know," Alina said. "Good," Carol put her hand briefly on Alina's arm. "Play what you played for those 300 people. Play it for 200 more." She went back out. Alina sat at the piano, put her hands in her lap, breathed. The audience filled the seats. She could hear them, the sound of 200 people finding their places, the rustle and the murmur, and the particular anticipation of a room that is about to receive something. Then the lights in the house went down. And she walked out. The applause when she appeared was warm and immediate. She stood at the front of the stage and looked at the room, really looked at it, 200 faces in the low light, all of them turned toward her, and she dipped her head once, the same small, genuine acknowledgement she had made at the Alderton. Then she sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and began. The first piece opened the room gently, a measured, deliberate invitation. She was not rushing. She was not performing eagerness. She moved through each phrase with the care Ruth had demanded, trusting the passage before the resolution, letting the music earn what it arrived at. The room settled within the first 30 seconds. Not the polite settling of an audience being patient, but the real settling, the shift in collective attention that happens when a room recognizes that it is in the presence of something worth being still for. She moved from the first piece to the second, then the third, which was short and stark and required the room to stay with her through its silences, and the room did. These were Carol Dunning's people, listeners, real ones, people who had come to hear and not merely to be present. Then she began the piece she had been building for years. The 11 minutes that Ruth had heard on the third Thursday. The peace that had grown in the apartment on the keyboard through the headphones, in the quiet of a life that had been smaller than she had planned, but that had, it turned out, given her something she could not have gotten any other way. 3 years of daily practice with no audience and no performance pressure and no one to impress, just her and the music, stripped of everything except the necessity of getting it right. The first phrase rose and the room received it. She moved through the middle passage, the one where she had been disappearing into technique, losing herself to the difficulty of it, and she stayed. She stayed present in every measure, the way Ruth had asked, the way she had practiced, and she felt the difference in her hands, felt the difference in the room, which leaned almost imperceptibly toward her as she played, like something drawn forward by warmth. The end of the piece was quiet, very quiet, the kind of quiet that asks the audience to lean in and meet it halfway, to contribute their own silence to what is happening, and they did. 200 people in a room with a wooden ceiling and draped windows and a Yamaha concert grand, all of them utterly still, all of them listening. The last note. She held it, let it thin. Lifted her hands. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. She counted them without meaning to. Then the room came apart. Not the polite applause, the real thing. The involuntary thing, people on their feet before they decided to stand, some of them calling out, not words exactly, just sounds of something that needed to exit the body. The woman in the 4th row was pressing both hands to her face. The man beside her was clapping with his eyes closed. Alina sat at the piano for a moment. Just a moment. Then she stood, looked at the room, let herself see every one of them. She bowed, a real bow this time, full and unhurried, with nothing held back. She had earned it. They had earned it. In the back of the house, near the exit, Carol Dunning stood with her arms folded and her reading glasses still pushed up on her forehead, and an expression that she had not worn in a very long time, the expression of someone who has just been reminded of why they do what they do, why they have spent 12 years building something, what all of it was for. She did not try to compose her face. She let it be what it was. After the applause, after the receiving line at the edge of the stage, after the conversations and the business cards and the woman who waited until nearly everyone had left to tell Alina quietly that her husband had passed away 8 months ago and she had not cried once since, not at the funeral or after it, but something in the middle piece had broken something loose in her, and she had cried through most of the concert, and she needed Alina to know that she was grateful for that after all of it. Alina went backstage and sat in the small, plain room with its folding chair and its mirror and its single bulb, and she sat there for a while. Not thinking, just sitting. Carol came in after a few minutes with a glass of water and set it on the table. I want to offer you 3 more dates, she said, this season. Alina looked at the water glass. Okay. Also, Carol said, there is a gentleman in the lobby who has been waiting very patiently for the past 40 minutes and asked me to let you know he was here. His name is Richard Ashton. Alina was quiet. Carol looked at her with the clear eyes of someone who knew when not to interpret. I can tell him you've left, she said, if you'd prefer. Alina considered this. No, she said, tell him I'll be out in a few minutes. Carol nodded and left. Alina sat for another minute. Then she stood, checked her face in the mirror, calm, composed, the real face, not the professional one, and walked out. The lobby was almost empty. The last of the audience had filtered out. The lights had been brought back up to full, which made the room feel slightly harsh and ordinary after the intimacy of the concert. Ashton was standing near the door. He had his coat over his arm. He looked, in this context, slightly less certain of himself than he had at the Alderton, not diminished exactly, but recalibrated. The flat appraisal in his face had been replaced by something more complicated. He saw her. He did not move toward her with the same certainty he had shown at the gala, pushing through the crowd. He waited, let her come to him or not. She walked across the lobby. I saw the listing, he said. Online, I came because I owed you more than what I gave you at the Alderton. He paused, and I wanted to hear you play again. Alina looked at him. Did you? She said. Yes. She studied his face for a moment. There was nothing defensive in it. Whatever he was carrying tonight, he was carrying it without trying to put it down on her. Thank you for coming, she said. She meant it not as graciousness, not as diplomacy, as a genuine thing. He had come, which meant something had shifted in him, and she was not unmoved by that, even if it was not her responsibility and not her project. I made a comment at the gala, he said, about your hands. I remember. I've been thinking about it. He looked at her hands now, not with the dismissive assessment he had made at the Alderton, but with the specific attention of someone looking at something they had previously failed to see correctly. I was wrong, obviously. But the why of it is what's been sitting with me. Elena waited. I looked at you, he said, and I saw the uniform. I made a calculation based on the uniform and I stopped looking. He said it flatly, without decoration, the way of someone who has decided that being honest is more important than being comfortable. That's a habit I have. I don't think I knew it was a habit until last night. Most people don't, Elena said. He nodded slowly. I'd like to make an introduction if you're open to it. I sit on the board of the Grove Foundation. We fund arts programming across the city. I don't know what you need or what you want next, but I know people who should know your name if you want that. Elena thought about it. She thought about Carol Dunning's 3 dates. About Ruth Hale's open door. About the keyboard against the wall in the apartment, the headphones, the neighbor's baby. About 3 years of showing up to the work in a small room with nobody watching. I appreciate the offer, she said. Can I think about it? Something in Ashton's face shifted, a small, genuine surprise. He was not accustomed to being asked for time. Of course, he said. I'll reach out through Carol Dunning's office, Elena said. She knows how to find me. He nodded, put on his coat. You played something tonight, he said at the door. He paused, not because he was searching for words, but because he was making sure the words he had were the right ones. The long piece, in the middle of the program. I don't know the name of it. It doesn't have one, Elena said. I wrote it. He looked at her. You wrote it, he said. Yes. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he nodded, a different nod than the ones he had given at the Alderton, smaller and more real, and walked out. The lobby was quiet. Elena stood in the middle of it and looked at the door closing behind him and felt the clean, uncomplicated satisfaction of a night that had been what it needed to be. Not a vindication, she had not needed one. Not a reversal of fortune in the dramatic sense, not a scene from a film where the scoreboard gets corrected and everyone claps. Just a night of good work, of music that had been real. Of a room that had listened and been moved and carried something out with them into the cold air of the street. Of a man who had looked at a uniform and stopped looking, and had then, over the course of 2 evenings, found his way back to looking properly. Small corrections, quiet ones. They are the only kind that last. She put on her coat, picked up her bag, said goodnight to the last of the house staff, a young man sweeping near the stage door who nodded and said, "Great show tonight," with the easy sincerity of someone who had been listening through the wing and was not embarrassed about it. Thank you, she said. She walked out into Grove Street. The night was cool and clear, the way city nights get after the day's warmth has lifted, and the streets have gone quiet enough to remember they are streets and not corridors of noise. She could see stars, a few of them, the brightest ones that make it past the city light. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at them. Then she started walking. She had a lesson with Ruth on Thursday. She had 3 dates to plan for. She had a piece with no name that had been living in her hands for years and had finally heard itself in a room that was built for it. She had work. Real work, the kind that does not begin when someone gives you permission to do it and does not end when a room stops applauding. The kind that was happening every morning she had sat down at the keyboard in the apartment before anyone else was awake. Every evening she had played through the headphones while the city made its noise outside the window. Every day she had shown up to a practice that no one was watching and no one was grading and no one was going to reward except the work itself, which rewards exactly what you give it and nothing more and nothing less. She had given it everything. For 3 years in a small apartment on Clement Street, she had given it everything. And now it was giving back. She turned the corner onto her street, the building with the good bones and the terrible heating, the 4th floor, the keyboard against the wall beneath the window. She climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, went inside, did not sit at the keyboard. Ruth had said, "Let the work rest." She made tea instead, stood at the window with the mug warm in her hands and looked out at the street below, the last cars, the lit windows of other lives, the ordinary and extraordinary fact of a city that does not stop moving just because one person had a remarkable evening. She thought about the woman in the 4th row, the hands pressed to the face, the 8 months without tears. She thought about the man in the center of the room who had taken his wife's hand. She thought about the young man at the stage door with his broom who had been listening through the wing. This was what it was for. Not the applause was wonderful and she was not pretending otherwise, but the other part. The part that happened in people's chests, in the private dark behind their eyes, in the places that a good conversation and a kind gesture and even a perfectly cooked meal cannot reach. Only music goes there. And not all music, only the music that is truly played, truly meant, truly inhabited by the person making it. Only the music that comes from the same place in the body where the honest things live. She had always known this. She had known it at 4 years old, sitting at her first piano with her feet not reaching the pedals, feeling the sound move up through the keys and into her hands and into something deeper than her hands. She had known it in the apartment, every morning, headphones on, the neighbors baby quiet for once, just her and the notes and the necessary daily practice of being exactly who she was. She had known it when she sat down at the Steinway at the Grand Alderton, adjusted the bench 2 inches, placed her hands on the keys, and let 3 years of all of it come through. She finished her tea, rinsed the cup, put it back on the shelf. She stood in the middle of her small apartment and looked at the keyboard against the wall beneath the window, dark now, the headphones hanging from the corner. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she would sit down and begin deciding what to build next. Tonight she had played, tonight the room had listened. Tonight a woman had cried after 8 months of not being able to, and a man had taken his wife's hand, and a millionaire had stood in an empty lobby and looked at his own habits with something approaching honesty. And a young woman who had carried a tray for 3 years had stood on a small stage and bowed. And it had not been enough, and it had not been too much. It had been exactly right. She turned off the light, went to bed. Tomorrow,